My guest today is Michael Marlin, author of the new book, Astrotourism, Stargazers, Eclipse Chasers, and the Dark Sky Movement. Marlin, thank you so much for joining us. Should say you asked to be called Marlin by your last name. We're going to get to the main focus of your book in a moment. But I want to begin with a topic you do touch on in the book, space tourism. What do you make of these recent launches of two billionaires, Richard Branson taking his Virgin Galactic into the heavens from Spaceport America here in New Mexico, and of course Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin going up nearby in Van Horn, Texas?
Well, the best way that I can put this into context is to look at it historically. I think it was 1914, the very first passenger plane flew from St. Petersburg across the Tampa Bay, and it was $400, which is the equivalent of about $11,000 today for a 23-minute flight. And then the very first cruise ship that came online was in 1900, and only the very wealthy could go on it. It was somewhere between $75 and $175, depending upon the length of the cruise. And back then, the average pay for someone was $450 a year. So cruising was for the very wealthy. But today, everybody can pretty much afford to take a cruise if they save up for it.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. According to the companies, a lot of very wealthy people have already reserved spots for more launches. We are told the initial reservations for Virgin Galactic were $250,000, and now the price has actually risen to $450,000. The companies say that they have visions, like you just mentioned, of making this more affordable. What do you think about those claims, and how long do you think it'll take to make space tourism widely available, if ever?
Well, Dennis Tito was the very first space tourist in 2001, in keeping with the Kubrick theme. Went up to the International Space Station and spent $20 million for about 8 days in space, in orbit. Now, he said back then he thought the price was going to drop, but it's actually more than doubled since then to actually reach orbit. So whether or not the prices are going to come down, that is usually an economy of scale. And currently, the technology that they use to lift people involves rockets. However, there are other forms of space tourism. There's a group called Space Perspective, and they use hot air balloons to take people to 18 miles above the Earth, where you can see the curvature of the Earth, the blackness of space, and it's a 6-hour trip. 2 hours up, 2 hours aloft, 2 hours down. Whereas the Virgin Galactic and the Blue Origins, that's a 4-minute ride. So, and those trips in Space Perspectives run less than half the price. They're about $100,000 for a 6-hour trip.
How about that? I hadn't even heard of that. That sounds amazing. It would be great if we could have that kind of activity here in New Mexico. Well, this is all about dreams right now, and we'll just have to see where this goes. I want to move to something, though, that is accessible right now. Astrotourism, the title of your book. What is it, and how is it connected to something called the Dark Sky Movement?
Well, thank you for the question. Space tourism is where you go to a place to look down. Astrotourism is where you go to a place to look up. And most people, when they think of space astrotourism, what are the events that drive people to go see something in the dark sky? The aurora borealis, lunar eclipses, solar eclipses, meteor storms, and 80% of North Americans can no longer see the Milky Way galaxy. 99% of the world's population lives under some form of light pollution. So more and more people are traveling to see a dark sky. Most people live and die under a dome of light and never have any idea of what is out there in the cosmos and what we're really connected to. So New Mexico is ideally placed to really cultivate astrotourism in its state, and that spreads the tourist dollar out a whole lot more to remote and rural areas that normally would never get a tourist to come and see them.
So important to bring that up because, of course, New Mexico needs that infusion of money. Tourism, one of our biggest industries in New Mexico. And once again, we're lagging behind the national average in terms of our recovery. That happened with the Great Recession. It's happening again in the recovery from the pandemic. You have some very impressive numbers in your book from the National Park Service on the economic potential of astrotourism. Tell us about that.
Yeah, a study was done by David Mitchell and Terrell Galway. They're both doctors of economics at Missouri State University. And what they did was they determined, using a simple input-output modeling, that on the National Park Service, specifically the Colorado Plateau, will generate $5.2 billion, that's billion with the B, $5.2 billion over the next 10 years from astrotourism. Astrotourism requires you stay over a night. And when any guest or tourist stays overnight, now their dollars going out to the hotels, to the restaurants, to the gift shops, and all of these other places. So it is a rising economy, and more places around the world are starting to plug into that travel trend.
And let's get the global perspective. You even note in your book, Astrotourism, that there are tours all around the world connected to this wonderful opportunity.
Well, astrotourism used to be called astronomy tourism, and it started in the 1940s. And it was astronomers, both professional and amateurs, going to see the night sky. But with the advent of social media, now there are more and more pictures out there which are driving this market more than anything before. I mean, technology changes tourism. Take scuba. You know, it used to be just a few people would go underwater. Now it's a worldwide, activity. So yeah, there's groups that'll do tours specifically to the Aurora Borealis. There's Ring of Fire expeditions that just chases eclipses, solar eclipses in totality. And now there are other places like Star Tours in Europe, where you take different routes, where you go from one place to another around Europe, taking these what they call star tours.
I have to say, Marlin, I am not someone who has, looked up in a telescope all of my life or anything like that. But one of the things that I always remember seeing on television that was just enchanting, even on a much smaller screen than looking at it in person, was something you just mentioned, Aurora Borealis, otherwise known as the Northern Lights, correct? And this is something a lot of people think about, right, when they talk about astrotourism.
It is one of the superstars of celestial events, and yet the solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse, other than war and famine, drives more people temporarily than anything else.
Wow.
And so the 2017 total solar eclipse had, some 200 million people tune into it. 18 times the viewership of the last episode of Game of Thrones. And now the next eclipse coming up in 2024 is going to have even more people. And people in Albuquerque, you're only 9 hours away from the path of totality. So that's going to be a much bigger event than the one in 2017.
Sure, and we're only about 3 hours from Albuquerque. I know that if that's the best place to go, people watching now. Anywhere in New Mexico, right? Where it's dark.
No, the eclipse, the path of totality will not go through Mexico. It starts in Mexico, goes through Texas, up through Oklahoma, Missouri, and all the way up into the Great Lakes states. So people in Albuquerque would have to drive one day to get into the path of totality.
I see. Okay. So I'm sure you always get this question. Tell me about your favorite astrotourism experience.
It's usually the last one, whatever the last one was. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to see 3 comets in my lifetime and meteor storms that had 200 count per hour. But the last one was the full lunar eclipse that happened here where I live on the big island of Hawaii. And I was laying on my roof and the moon turns red. And now I could see all of the stars around the moon. And you can never see that because when the moon is full, it washes out all of the stars around it. But because it was red, it was the full moon with encompassed and embraced by all the stars around it. I will never forget that. That's a really indelible memory.
It certainly is, looking up at the sky. If you have been in a really dark place, especially, it is something you never forget. Marlin, let me ask you, how do you see astrotourism growing, and will space tourism help it to grow? Because certainly at least initially, any of these launches into space are getting enormous international attention.
They are getting enormous attention now. There was a time when they first launched rockets into space, and I remember them bringing a television set into my classroom in elementary school, and the whole idea of a TV in a classroom was like unheard of. And now it's like, there are numerous launches that go up all the time and people don't even know them. I mean, the last 2 got a lot of coverage because, it was the owners of these companies. But after a certain point, there's not going to be the same kind of media coverage. Now with astrotourism, and again, space tourism is a subset of astrotourism, there's a much larger number of people who will be able to participate, not only firsthand by being an astrotourist, but also people who will be able to cater to the astrotourist. And that's what the book is about. It's about the supply side of this new travel trend. Airbnb says it has some 3,000 listings now where people include telescopes.
Wow.
So I mean, it's the numbers are really, pardon the pun, astronomical as to how quickly this travel trend is growing.
Do you have anything on your list, Marlin? Do you trips you'd like to take for this?
Well, okay, so I'm actually working on a television series right now called The Astrotourist, where I'm going to be the host. And the premise of the show is to go around the world and visit these dark sky places, but also to take a deep cultural dive into how different different indigenous groups view the stars. We all have different stories about the stars. And in New Mexico, different tribal groups would have different stories about the stars. The ones that most of us know are the ones that have been laid down by the ancient Greeks. So the television series will travel to Lapland to see the Northern Lights. It'll go to the Atacama Desert, which has the big array like the one in New Mexico. Australia, India, Namibia, all of these dark sky places. But so much of human history has been stitched into the stars that we're not aware of it. Our holidays are based on celestial events. When to plant, when to harvest were based on the stars. When it was time to shear the sheep, when it was, when birds started to migrate. So our study of the stars throughout the course of history allowed civilization to grow. It allowed us to navigate across oceans and across the seas. And now we've practically forgotten it. There's an anonymous quote that says, "With the invention of indoor plumbing, we lost our connection with the night sky."
Well, I'm glad we're getting it back, and safe travels to you, and good luck with that TV series. I can't wait to see it.
Oh, it'll be great fun. Thank you so much for having me on, Fred.
Marlin is Michael Marlin. The book is Astrotourism. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fred.